My name is Mark, a recording angel. I've been observing this earth since the dawn of creation. The Most High has asked me to share my recordings with you. The following are my records of the history of God's true church, down through centuries of oppression, and onward until the promised earth is made new once more, collected in this book, War of the Invisibles, the amazing story of the great controversy. If today's recording contains situations which might be uncomfortable for younger listeners, I will mark the video with the words parental guidance recommended. Chapter 8, Part 2, Monique, Mountain Hideout, Vendée, June 21, 1791. I continued to record Monique's life. She and Nanette had settled into life in a rebel hideout in the mountainous area of the Vendée. It was an area where many of the royalists, as well as criminals escaping justice, were hiding, but it was also a safe place for God's people to hide. The few Protestants left in France found shelter here along with some of the Catholics, those loyal to the Pope, and those loyal to God, with both of these now being a capital offense. It was a strange mix of people, yet all of them were dependent on getting along with one another. In the year and a half Monique had been in the mountain hideout, she had become a young woman. To the human eye, she hardly resembled the child she had been when she and Nanette had escaped from the chateau. She was tall and rounded and very tan. In her peasant garb, she looked and acted just like any of the other people who lived in the poverty-stricken Vendée.
"Monique," Uncle Francois called, "I need you to go into town with me today to get some supplies."
"All right," she said. "Let me tell Nanette where I am going, and I'll be right there."
Nanette exited the small hut, wiping her hands on her apron.
"It's fine," she said. "Just be careful and avoid talking to anyone you don't have to. Infirmiers are everywhere." "Oui, I know, Nanette, and I will be careful," said Monique. "You tell me this every time we go into town, but God is taking good care of me."
Nanette nodded.
"He has taken care of us," she said.
Monique smiled. She had never thought very much about God before the burning of the chateau. He had never seemed important before. Now she was learning much about him, and was even learning to read some of the scriptures that had been translated into French and brought to the Vendée by the Huguenots. As she bumped along in the cart with Uncle Francois, she heard noise coming from the village.
"Something must be going on there, Uncle Francois," she said.
Francois was no relation to Monique or Nanette, but in their small community they had become family, and addressed each other as aunt or uncle.
"Oui," he said. "I hear shouting, and it sounds like celebrating. Maybe something good has happened."
Monique's heart lifted. Could the revolution be over? Perhaps they would all be able to go home. Maybe Papa would be out of prison, and their family could be all back together again.
"Oh, please, God," she whispered. "That would be wonderful."
As they rode into the village, her stomach twisted into a cold knot. The people were celebrating in a frenzied, frightening way. They were doing some kind of strange dance, whirling and flailing their arms in the air, and then at the end, all of them dropping to the ground as if dead.
"What are they doing?" she asked.
"Dancing,"
Uncle Francois replied grimly. "Dancing?" Monique asked incredulously. "It doesn't look like any dancing I have ever learned. I've never seen such a thing. It looks almost barbaric."
"It is," said Uncle Francois. "It is the Carmagnole."
"Carmagnole?"
"Oui," he said. "It's the dance of the Revolution. Notice everyone drops dead in the end. I fear everyone in France will be dead before this is over. Hush now. Let us not speak of it. We're getting close to the people."
Monique stared at the dancers filling the streets. They bumped into each other as they whirled and twirled. They were wild and sweating. To her, it looked more like a frenzied ritual than any fun. They reached the first stall in the market to purchase their supplies. Uncle Francois listed their needs to the shopkeeper and then asked,
"What is this celebration?"
"You haven't heard. Where have you been?"
The shopkeeper retorted.
"You peasants don't keep up with anything, do you?"
"Alas," Uncle Francois said, "it seems keeping up with the farm and getting enough food for the family is almost all I can do. What has happened?"
"Ah," said the shopkeeper, delighted that he could tell the story to someone who hadn't heard it.
"Our foolish ex-king and that Austrian woman he had for a queen tried to escape from the Tuileries. What an idiot he is! Does he think no one would recognize him when his face is on all of our money?"
He laughed crudely. Uncle Francois tried to chuckle.
"So what happened?"
Monique asked.
"Well, they made it as far as Varennes, and then they were recognized and caught and dragged back to Paris with all the indignities they deserved. They will be kept in prison now. They didn't deserve the palace at the Tuileries anyway."
"I see,"
Uncle Francois said, nodding his head thoughtfully.
"Oui,"
the shopkeeper went on,
"and they've split them up now. That way they can try to escape again as a family. And heaven knows, Louis will not try to escape without the Austrian woman, and that Austrian woman will not leave without her children. So this will probably not happen again, unless they are even more foolish than we thought, eh?"
"What's going to happen to them?" Monique asked.
"I'm not sure," said the shopkeeper. "The National Assembly has not decided yet, but I hope they are all executed."
Monique turned and started carrying the supplies out to the cart. She sat out there and waited for Uncle Francois to come. She was afraid the sickness she felt in her stomach would show on her face. In a few minutes Uncle Francois joined her, and they headed toward the outside of town. The cart bumped along on the cobblestone streets. All the happiness she had felt coming into town had left her. The town that had looked so exciting and inviting now seemed cold and dirty. The chipped plaster on the battered buildings showed the wood slats beneath it.
"Oh God," she whispered, "I just want to go back to the mountains. At least I feel closer to you there."
They passed the large stone church on their way out of the village. Its door had been knocked off the hinges, and it stood bare and empty. The building looked as cold and unresponsive as the church it had represented. Monique shook her head.
"If I had never come to the mountains," she whispered, "I never would have learned to think of you separately from the church. But you are separate, and I'm glad I found out, because you are God and you never change. But the church is made up of people, and some of them are good." She glanced at Uncle Francois. "And some of them get corrupted with power."
She stared back at the stone church.
"Thank you for teaching me the difference."
Vendée Mountain Hideout, September 7, 1792. Uncle Francois rode into the mountain hideout and unhitched his donkey. His shoulders drooped as he led it into the cave where he would feed it and let it rest. Nanette came out of the hut and began to unload the supplies from the cart and carry them into the back of the cave for storage. Then she stopped.
"Uncle Francois," she asked, "what is the matter?"
"Something terrible has happened."
Francois lifted his eyes to meet Nanette's and nodded.
"There have been massacres in Paris all week," he said. "The mobs have broken into the prisons and have been killing the royal prisoners. They have killed as many varistos as they could get their hands on."
Nanette dropped her eyes.
"Monique's father?" she asked.
"Oui,"
Uncle Francois said.
"He was killed. I don't know how to tell her. I've grown so attached to that girl, I just can't bear to tell her that her papa was torn apart by a mob."
Nanette pulled herself up to her full height and squared her shoulders.
"I will tell her. I've been responsible for her all of her little life. I will tell her."
Uncle Francois smiled gratefully and continued to unload the cart. Nanette turned back toward the huts.
"Monique," she called, "we must talk."
Monique sat by the mountain stream, her knees pulled up to her chest, hugging them with her arms, rocking herself slowly back and forth. She felt too numb to cry. It had been 3 years since she had seen her papa, but when she had found out that he was not killed when the chateau was burned, She had always imagined that somehow he would get out of prison and come find her.
"Now that will never happen," she whispered.
Uncle Francois walked up behind her.
"Monique, ma petite."
She turned to look at him. The older man dropped his eyes. As fond as he was of Monique, he couldn't help remembering that she was the daughter of a marquis.
"I am sorry about your papa,"
he said. Monique nodded, unable to talk.
I brought you something,"
he stammered. Reaching into the large pocket of his billowing peasant smock, he pulled out a small slip of paper.
"It's a scripture piece. This one you may keep. It's yours."
He turned and fled back to the cluster of huts. Monique held it in her hand for a long time, just looking at the water. Finally she opened it. There, inscribed in French, in Uncle Francois's shaky handwriting, was a copy of a scripture verse. "I will be a father to the fatherless." Big tears welled in Monique's eyes and poured down her cheeks.
"Oh, thank you, God,"
she whispered.
"How good you are to send me a message like this right now. You've been my father for the last 3 years, and you've taken good care of me. You've protected me and fed me. Oh, thank you."
She clutched the scrap of paper tightly in her hand until she realized it was all crumpled and soaked with perspiration. Reaching inside her ragged dress, she unpinned a tiny locket from the lining of her chemise. Nanette had sold all of her jewelry she had been wearing the day they escaped, except for her tiny locket. She popped it open and looked again at the miniature portrait of her mother and father. Then she folded Uncle Francois's scrap of paper into a tiny piece, fit it into the center of the locket, and pinned it back inside her undergarment.
"You are the only papa I have now," she whispered. "But you are a good one, and I love you."
I smiled. The trees around the mountain stream rustled as the spirit of the Almighty drew close. He caressed Monique's face with a cool breeze and dried her tears into little clean paths down her dusty face. I nodded my head, even though she couldn't see me. Monique was right. He was the best father she would ever have. Vendée Hideout, December 25, 1792. Monique clutched her ragged blanket around her shoulders as she stirred the water in the huge cauldron over the open fire. Uncle Francois limped out of his cave, where he and 2 of the other men slept with the donkey.
"Come sit by the fire, Uncle Francois," Monique called. "Perhaps if you get warm, your joints won't hurt you so badly."
Uncle Francois nodded and limped over to the log she had rolled up for him.
"Thank you, ma petite. Joyeux Noël."
Monique caught her breath. That's right. Today was Christmas.
"Happy birthday, Jesus," she whispered.
Uncle Francois smiled.
"You talk to him a lot, don't you?"
"Oh, did I say that out loud?"
Monique said, embarrassed. Uncle Francois nodded.
"He's good, ma petite,"
he said.
"Talk to him all you want to. It's a good thing."
I nodded. It was a good thing. Monique spoke with the Almighty more and more often as she grew older and as times grew harder.
"Would you like a nice hot drink?" she asked.
Uncle Francois laughed.
I suppose that means we're out of porridge and we're just going to drink hot water this morning."
Monique nodded. The last time Uncle Francois had gone to the village for supplies, the man who usually helped them was gone, and his small shop was all broken and empty. No one knew where he was. The food had run out the day before.
"Well," Monique explained, "I put some water on to boil anyway, because with this cold, drinking something hot will at least warm your insides."
Uncle Francois smiled at her.
"A hot drink sounds good," he said. "It won't hurt any of us to go without food for a few days. The Lord knows we're here, and He will take care of us."
"I hope you don't forget us here," Monique thought. "You knew my papa was in prison too?"
Then she shook her head.
"I can't be thinking things like that," she said. "I'm going to have to just trust you to take care of us. Someday, maybe I will understand why some of these things have happened. Until then, I need just to trust you."
She ladled out a mug of the hot water and Uncle Francois cupped it in his gnarled hands.
"Do you hear, horses?" asked Monique.
Uncle Francois cocked his head. His hearing was not as sharp as Monique's.
"Quick," he said, "to the cave. It is horses."
"I will not leave you,"
Monique said, and she sat down resolutely on the log next to Uncle Francois. 2 men rode into the clearing. They looked like soldiers. Monique slipped her hand into Uncle Francois's gnarled one and tried to keep from shaking.
"Oh, anybody up?"
one of them shouted. Nanette rushed out of her hut. The other 2 men emerged from the cave.
"We're up,"
Uncle Francois shouted.
"We are traveling and hungry," said the soldier. "What do you have in your pot there?"
"Hot water," Monique answered. "We haven't started to fix breakfast yet."
The 2 men got off their horses.
"We'll wait," they stated.
"Well, you'll wait a long time," Nanette said. "We have no breakfast. This young optimist here has made us hot water because she thinks it will keep us warmer than cold water. But we have no food."
The soldiers looked at each other.
"But you know how to cook, don't you?"
one asked Monique.
"Oh, oui,"
Monique answered. She had learned to make bread, stew, and everything that Nanette knew how to cook.
"Well," one of the soldiers said, "we have a few things in our bag here. If you'll throw them in the pot, we'll go hunting and see if we can find something in these woods."
They took a small bag off the back of one of their horses and tossed it to Monique. They remounted their horses and left. Monique opened the bag. Where had they found these things?
"Look, Nanette," she cried. "Carrots, turnips, and potatoes." Monique stared after the men. "Where are they from?" she asked. "They must be important if they have food rations like this."
There were also 2 loaves of bread. Quickly, she and Nanette cut up the vegetables and threw them in the pot. In a short time, the men were back from their hunting with a large stag. Expertly, they butchered the deer and gave some of the meat to Monique to put in the stew pot. The rest of it they cut in strips. They packed it between layers of snow next to Nanette's hut.
"There," one of them grunted. "The snow should keep the meat fresh, and you will have meat for several weeks if you're careful. Now, is the stew ready yet?"
Uncle Francois sat chuckling by the fire. The warmth had helped his joints, and he didn't seem to be in pain anymore. He patted Monique's arm as she handed him a mug of hot soup.
"I told you he would provide," he said. "He wouldn't invite us to his birthday party without some food."
Monique laughed, too. It was a good Christmas, after all.
This broadcast has come from the book War of the Invisibles by Sally Pierson Dillon, with permission from the Review and Herald Publishing Association. This book and the rest of the series, War of the Ages, can be purchased by going to www.adventistbookcenter.com or by calling 1-800-765-6955. I'm your narrator, Austin Backus, and this audio project is a gift to you from my free Christian book ministry, RXF 1888. Please visit our website, www.rxf1888.com, to request free Christian books for both kids and adults. And join us here again for more stories from Mark the Recording Angel.